converted CPAs and advisors. Welcome, Chad.
And I've given you a copy of the PowerPoint slides that Chad's going to be putting up on the screen there as he goes ahead and talks you through the FY 2019 final financial statements.
Members of the commission, it's nice to be here this morning. I'm Chad Atkinson, as was mentioned, and didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I was in Boulder City doing an audit presentation and got up and went home, got some sleep, and then made it here. So if I start saying city council or, you know, funny things like that, then just wave your arm at me and we'll get it corrected. So it's nice to be here. We're here to present the fiscal year 2019 audit report. And I was absent last year, so I had a scheduling conflict and somebody else presented, so I felt a little bit out of place, like, oh, I missed something last year, and it was this meeting, so it's good to be back. I want to say at the beginning of this presentation, just a few things related to the county staff. The audit went really well this year. We were able to move through our audit procedures, gather all the information that we needed, and most of that is attributed to the team that we work with at the county. Elizabeth and all of her associates in her team are really great to work with, really organized, and we appreciate that in working with the county. So just wanted to spotlight that a little bit and say congratulations to having a wonderful finance person in your county. So a lot of the things that you'll see in our report today have to do with just good financial management over several years, not just in fiscal year 19, but starting back when Elizabeth started here and just working with the county and making progress year to year. So anyway, just wanted to say that. I also wanted to say to the commission that we're doing an on-time delivery of a pretty intense document. It's how many pages we got here? 250 something?
Too many.
Yeah. Pretty intense document that Elizabeth and I have looked at many times over the past few weeks, just finalizing. So we're happy to have made it to this point. It's the best time of year to finish the audit, right? Okay, so we're going to do, I'm going to go through my audit reports first today. And I'm just going to hit these at a very high level, and if you have further questions on the reports, you can get back to me later. But the independent auditor's report on page 13 is an unmodified report or a clean opinion on the financial statements. So no issues or problems there. We have a report on internal controls and on compliance. That's on page 177. And this is a report where if we had any internal control deficiencies or compliance issues, that is where we would report that to you. But I'm happy to report to you that there are no internal control problems that we came across or compliance issues. So that's an easy to summarize that report. So congratulations on that. The other thing that we do is along the same lines with compliance, we look at the NRS compliance. We take sections out of the NRS that apply to financial management, and then we come into the county and we test the various requirements there. So we're happy to report there's no instances of non-compliance that we came across in our test work. So that makes this report pretty short, but probably no questions there. We can keep moving on. Congratulations. Okay, the other report that we issue is on page 187, and we do what's called a federal single audit on your federal awards. And the county had a pretty major federal project this year with the airport, and there was a little over $12 million in federal funding that came in, and then associated projects out of the airport related to that money. So we went through the audit procedures there to test compliance with federal expenditures, and we came across no findings or issues. And there's also no prior year findings related to federal awards that we need to follow up with. One thing that you'll find on page 189 is actually where we list it, at the bottom of page 189, is this qualification as a low-risk auditee. The county has had multiple years of no findings or problems that have been cited, and so that allows the county to be classified as a low-risk auditee, and that's looked on favorably for grantors. When they're looking at granting money, they know which counties and cities and towns know how to manage federal funds, and so that's a positive thing for the county. And I think this is the third year, did we decide?
I believe it is.
Third year of low-risk auditee qualifications, so congratulations on that. All right, so fund financial highlights, I'll go there next. I'm gonna have you just open up to page 30 in your CAFR. Is it okay to use the word CAFR? It's kind of an accountant. Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
Education for us,
My,
you bet.
my family owns a CPA firm, so we're cool.
You got it. Okay, so we got our CAFR here. Page 30 is just kind of a statement of your operations for the year for the various funds in the county. There are 4 major funds, as you can see there: the general fund, the grants fund, SB 74 fund, and the airport improvement fund. And what makes them major is that they just have a little bit more in terms of activity or expenditures or revenues going on in those funds, and so they qualify as major funds. I wanted to just look at the net change overall for the funds. So third line from the bottom is your net change in fund balance, and this just gives you an indication of whether the financial position of that fund improved or went down. So you can see the general fund improved, the grants fund has a little bit of a improvement. SB 74 fund was up 3.6 million. The airport improvement fund was down 345,000. And then this other governmental funds column, just so you're aware, that includes all of the other funds for the county, which are many. So the detail for the other governmental funds, if you wanted to look through each fund, is in the back of your financial statement, starting on page 102. 102. So if you wanted to go through each fund, you could do that. But overall, the total governmental funds improved by 7.4 million during fiscal year 19. Any questions there before I keep going? I'm gonna, oh, did I have a question? No. I'm gonna have you also look at the fire district operating fund, knowing that this is a kind of a joint meeting. So on page 118, page 118 is the scheduled revenues and expenditures for the fire district operating fund. So items of note here, the fire district operating fund incorporated emergency medical services during fiscal year 19, so there's now a breakout of the departments in the expenditures there. So you've got fire and EMS listed, and also the revenues associated with EMS were moved into this fund, so they hit your line here of charges for services at 1.1 million. And then also at the bottom of this statement, you can see the transfer in from the county general fund was 396,000. So the overall change in the fire district operating fund was 476,000. And any questions on any of that? Okay, and then we should also look at the balance sheet for the fire district operating fund, so that's on page 90. Just give you a quick look at that, and we can continue on. So page 90, you've got, looks like it's the third column in. You've got 2.7 million in cash and investments. And then your fund balances down below, you've got $1 million set aside for catastrophic events. And then 1.7 million set aside restricted or committed for public safety purposes. So those are the resources on hand at June 30, 2019. So now I'm gonna go into some trends for your major funds, just for the last 5 years, and I'm gonna review fund balance. So just to remind everybody, fund balance is simply, if you have your assets and you subtract your liabilities, you have kind of the resources left over.
Okay.
And so, as I go into these graphs, I'm just gonna cover just the fund balances. And you can see here with the general fund, there are 4 different components of the fund balance. The top line is your net proceeds mitigation of $8 million. That's a flat line. It's been there for the last 5 years. And then I'm going to cover just the bottom 2. You've got your non-spendable amount of $27,699. That is just part of your fund balance. Those are prepaid expenses and inventory that's already been purchased, so it's not spendable. The green line that you're showing up here, the $416,000, that is assigned fund balance, and that assigned fund balance is set aside for the next fiscal year's budget. So it's already kind of committed or set aside, so that's 416. And then you can see the unassigned fund balance went from 4.5 million to a little over 7 million. And so that's a positive, I'll call it a northeast trend for the county. We'd like to see northeast trends, not too steep, but northeast, okay? So this represents about 7.4 months of operating reserves for the general fund. Just as a reminder, the basic minimum that you should have for reserves is 2 months, and so the county's ahead of that, kind of the bare minimum. And the county, from my prior conversations, I believe is setting the bar at 3 months. They'd like to have 25% set aside at all times, so we're in good shape there. Nice, healthy financial position. So, any questions on the general fund? Okay, this is, the next fund to present is the SB 74 fund. And the thing I love about this trend is it shows the county's preparedness or the planning ahead for this core complex that's going to be constructed. You can see that the savings of the fund balance started back in fiscal year 16, well, even in 15. The county started setting aside funds for this project, and so that's a wonderful trend. We're currently at 15.5 million, but I understand the cost of the county complex is much larger than that. So we'll continue to save funds and have that set aside. Did you want to comment on that at all?
Yeah, the 15.5 million is the basis. Just as a reminder, we have $10 million through the USDA in loans that are going to be contributed, $5 million from the state of Nevada legislature, and then we have what will be coming in net proceeds and our SB 74 revenues to round out that, as well as some court special revenue funds to round out the total funding for that project. And so we're right on track, and we're already started, so it's very exciting.
So I'm going to go to, this is another major fund for the county, the Airport Improvement Fund. And the fund balance is down a little bit this year in this fund. And this is because there were a lot of federal funds that went through this fund, but there was also a county portion that was required. I think it was 7% of the project had to be paid for with county funds. So that's why we have a reduction here. It was planned to use some of the fund balance there to make the county's contribution. All right, then just a couple of capital asset highlights. There are more capital asset changes that went on in fiscal year 19. I just picked out the top 3. So you had the airport runway phase 3, construction of $7.7 million during fiscal year 19, and it's at the end of the year 7.9 was in construction in progress. I believe it'll be finalized in fiscal year 2020, fiscal year 20, and placed into service. The same with the airport taxiway. There was 5.1 million in additions there, 5.1 million at year end, and that will be placed in service in 2020. And then finally, the jail expansion of the courthouse. As of the end of June 30th, there was 869,000 in progress. So those are just a few highlights of things that are going on with the county's funds. And then finally, it's always nice to just see the cash investments summarized. So I've got your cash investment trend. You've got 44.3 million in fiscal year 18. You're up to 51.3 million, with much of that, well, a substantial portion of that being committed for the county courthouse project. So, are there any questions that I can answer for you?
Anyone got anything for Chad?
Pretty clear at this point, yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
We've come a long ways, haven't we, Jen?
Yes, we were talking about that in audit committee meeting this morning,
Wow.
just, yeah, when we started with the county several years ago, there were multiple pages of findings that we had to address and financial issues to address, and so we're making significant strides. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Anything else? Anybody got anything? Okay. We had the audit committee, and I think it's important to emphasize to the commission the strides that have been made as far as where the county sits financially and the way we're operating the county. We're doing extremely well. We're on the right track. We continue to trend to a good point. We're not overspending the county, and it's important that the community and everybody know White Pine County is being run very well. We have great elected officials. We have great department heads. We have a good commission. And as long as we continue on this and we stay focused on what our job is, mainly the budget, we have a great finance department. It's important for the county citizens to know that their county is being run efficiently and we're on the right track and we continue on this path. So it's congratulations to everybody from the bottom all the way to the top. We're doing very well. We're never out of the woods completely, but as long as you stay focused, and we are, we'll continue to run this county in a very good manner. So thank you, Chad, and Elizabeth, everybody, department heads, elected officials, I mean, everybody.
Teamwork.
It's exactly what you said, Lori, that's exactly what it is. So, that being said, we are gonna move on to our next item.
We need to make a motion to approve.
Yes,
Yes,
and
we do.
so you need to approve it,
Right.
but only as to the county, because we're in the county
Yeah.
side right now, and we'll have to re-agenda it for the fire commission to approve as a fire commission.
Okay, let's
Motion
go.
to approve the White Pine County
You're out of compliance with NRS if they do that.
comprehensive annual financial report.
Motion by Lori and a second by Ian. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? None, passed unanimous. And now we will, what are you gonna do, Mike? We're gonna open the fire district, or what are we gonna do?
No, we-
That's gonna be amended later.
Okay, so this has not been agended in the fire commission meeting. However, there might be something coming up, and we might be able to get this done again, not today.
Okay,
But the NRS requires that we approve it before the first of the year.
okay. Well, this is our last meeting.
Is it?
Really?
It's not uncommon in it for the special one, just in case.
So what can we do, Mike?
Nothing right now.
Okay, well, then, that's that. So we had passed unanimous on the county audit. Okay, that was the 9:30, so we
got one more on the
One more on the,
we're on page 3. Item 2, discussion for possible action, approval of a 1-year extension for the Hinton Burdick CPA and Advisors Audit Services pursuant to their 5-year proposal that the county awarded for 3 years with the option of 2 1-year extensions. Elizabeth?
Thank you. Yeah, you originally back several years ago approved a 5-year proposal with 3 years to be approved and the option for 2 1-year extensions. The FY19 audit was the 3rd year of that engagement. So now I'm looking to see if you would like to continue based on the 2 optional 1-year extensions. I'm asking for approval of a 1-year extension with Hinton Burdick to do our FY 2020 audit. The other option is to go out to RFP to gain proposals and see what's available. if we want to do that, so.
Anyone got that?
You know, with the history that we've had with Hiddenberg, I really don't feel the need to go shopping. I'm
I
very
agree.
pleased and always have been. I would make a motion to approve the extension.
Second.
Motion by Shane and a second by Ian. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, passed unanimous. Okay, now we move forward. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a couple of minutes here before we go to our next timed item.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Judge Bishop is here, he has a calendar date, could we call him, he's on page 5, item B5.
Sure.
Thank you for taking me early or out of order or whatever it was.
We've got time.
Good morning, Judge.
So, I think the backup letter kind of explained everything that we need to get done and the reasons for it. If you got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
For the public, we're on page 5, item 5A, and it's Judge Stephen Bishop, discussion for possible action. The approval to utilize $3,000 of personnel, salary, wages, expected surplus balance to compensate interns for assistance in eliminating historic backlog of conviction reports to the Nevada Central Repository and other clerical tasks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, this was not brought to me prior to this meeting. I have not had an opportunity to look at the proposed cost savings. I do not believe we have any job descriptions for interns. I know we have had interns in the past, we have not paid them. So I would request that we look at this from a financial perspective before we take any action on this. Because there are human resources implications, there are financial implications, and I don't know that we've addressed those adequately at this time.
Okay, listening to Elizabeth, and yeah, that's very good. We need to have all of the details in a row, all our eggs in a row. I'd ask for a motion to table this until we can have it reviewed by HR, finance, and we go through the correct channels. It's very important that we continue to follow the chain of command and go through the channels properly in order for us to take actions at commission meetings. So this is not a denial of your request, but it's a request that we have to go through. Let the finance department and the HR department take a good solid look at this so we can come back and make an educated decision on this. So that's my opinion.
Can we ask, as a discussion only, at least ask some clarifying questions right now so we can prepare for the next meeting on this item?
I believe that's okay under this
Yeah.
item.
It is. So like, I had a question, if we didn't call them interns, but just contracted with someone for that amount, or a couple people, would you be willing to do that?
I don't care what we call them. They've been in my office for quite a while. I estimate about 120 hours between the two of them, so about 60 hours each, maybe like 62 for one, 58 for the other. They've done lots of filings, they've filed receipts, subpoenas, they've clerked hearings when I've had staff out sick. They're bright, they've been discreet, they're hardworking. Quite honestly, this is a task that has to be done. I got the backlog, you can see. The money's there. I had a staff member leave, I was budgeted for X number of dollars. I had a staff member leave, so there's whatever Y number of dollars we would have paid that person in my budget. The court's authorized to spend how it sees fit under Sparks versus Sparks and some other cases. I came to ask to be polite about it, and I've discussed the matter with Tim about how we pay those volunteer interns, and I believe it was a third of the salary of the normal workers we can't exceed. So I've got the money there, I've got the task, it's necessary to be done, this is a reasonable way to do it. It's been done for it's been 1986, they're the oldest ones. It started really bad in 2007, 2008, and then it's just continued to get more complicated. We've corrected the issue going forward, but I've got to get these things cleaned up.
So would these $3,000 be for prospective hours, or is it reimbursement for hours already?
It will be for perspective, but I want to get started first of the year.
Okay.
Can I Can I clarify some,
Yeah.
just,
I
because
think they have the stuff wrong.
Judge Bishop and I did have some conversations, however, they're not interns, these are volunteers. These are a couple of high school students actually that have been working or volunteering in his office, doing some things such as shredding and filing and whatnot. But the question came up as far as how could he possibly compensate them? And there's very strict guidelines, IRS guidelines as far as not compensating volunteers. The one caveat is that he has the option to give gift cards for restaurants or whatever, but there's very strict, and I don't recall for this purpose what the dollar amount is, but it's a very low number as far as what you can do to recognize somebody in a volunteer status, so.
So,
That's the contractor
well,
perspective.
this is kind of what Elizabeth was talking about. What Judge Bishop was talking about is legally, he has the money that you've allocated to him for wages, he can spend it for employees without commission approval, really. But what Elizabeth and the commission is telling him is, let's make sure we know how we're going to pay them to make sure it's legally compliant. So if, what you're saying is, make sure that Tim and Elizabeth have a plan on how we're going to compensate these people, that's what the direction should be. Does that make sense? Not that it's not gonna happen.
Well, here's what I'm at, what I wanna do. I wanna get approval for the money, and then we get the plan figured out. So I can start working on, we don't have to come back.
That's what
why
I
we're
was
doing it
thinking,
kind of
with their, approve it with their blessing.
Yeah, as long as we come up with concurrence between finance and HR and yourself, I'm comfortable with moving forward.
That's why it's kind of vague at this point, because I realize this is your last one of the year, and I wanna get started in January.
Like I said, under the Supreme Court law, the separation of powers has been budgeted to Judge Bishop, and so he's actually, it's a, what's the word?
Courtesy.
Courtesy that he's come to the commission to let you know what he's doing with that $3,000.
So I make the motion to approve this request with, as long as finance and HR and Judge Bishop have agree on the plan and everything's legally.
Sound.
Second. Motion by Travis, and second by Ian to approve. Any further comments by the commission? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Opposed? None? Passed unanimous. Thank you, Steve.
Elizabeth, I'll get in touch with you and Tim at some point later in the week, I'll shoot you an email or something.
Perfect, thank
You
you.
know, we got a full day here. I understand that, but I'm trying to.
What about Bill?
Thank you.
We got,
We got, let's go by here. We got, Bert's not here, Mike's not here. Let's go to public county, officials. We got that. That will take us long to go through that. Let's go to, where we at? Let's go down to page 4, item 1A, items of elected officials and department heads. We can run through these very quickly, and then we can go to our 10 o'clock. I just want to utilize our time properly, so let's go through that. And on page 4, item A1 is Lori Carson, Commissioner. Discussion of possible action, the approval of the MOU between Nevada BLM Bristlecone Field Office and White Pine County Board of Commissioners Cooperating Agency Agreement regarding the Robinson Plan of Operations, amendment for the King and North Trip Dumps and the Tailing Storage Facility. Lori?
Yeah, this is the standard procedure to become a cooperating agency for the county. And this is what we do, so that the county has a seat at the table and aware of what's going on.
I move to approve.
Motion by Ian,
Second.
second by Shane. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, passed unanimous. Item 2 is Travis Godon, Vice Chairman. Discussion, possible action, and/or ratify to allow MedX Air One LLC and associated contractors, vendors to stage building materials and equipment adjacent to their leased ground at the airport in order to construct previously approved airplane hangar.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just part of a ratification. They've just had some hiccups with plans and so forth, but their materials are coming in, so right now they have nowhere to basically send them, because they got held up on other fronts. Mike can probably clarify a little better, but this is just basically giving that they can just put their stuff next to where they're gonna build, and then once they get the rest of their I's dot, and T's crossed, that build their area.
Anybody got a question on it?
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Lori, second by Ian. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. The last one, item 4, is myself, Richard House.